And I wonder too, I've noticed sort of again in our district, the approach definitely seemed to be a lot more structure at the lower grade levels and less structure as you went up. So for instance, our middle school and our high school are both doing kind of a rotating A-B day thing where the students quote unquote meet with half of their classes on Mondays and Wednesdays, and they meet the other half on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Friday is office hours. But at the middle school, they actually established hour by hour. At 9 o'clock, you check in with your language arts teacher. If you 10 o'clock, you check in with your social studies teacher, and at the high school, they kind of hadn't done anything at that level. So if there's that impulse to give the younger kids more structure, um, but I don't know whether that's instructionally sound or not, especially with technology in the mix. So I guess we're all learning. So. Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't. I had a brief conversation this morning with my supervisor here, and I don't know if this was coming out of some conversation he had been having with administration, but especially since the Hartford School District just came on board with distance learning stuff just Monday, is they're really having to address that issue of accessibility and of equity, and some conjecture about whether even at the state government level they may have to do something to step in either now or if they're looking down the road to make sure that those sort of equity issues are being addressed in every school district, because it's tough. It's suddenly moving everything in a direction we weren't expecting. So, um, all right, Yolanda, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I also know uh, you're only here for the tonight's class, so I don't know if you had anything you felt like jumping in with or sharing, but hmm, hmm, mm-hmm, Hmm. That's a good summary word for all of this. Yep. Got gotcha. Yeah, it's I mean it's been a learning curve I think across the board. I mean even for me I'm finding myself taking a fresh look at everything that I do with my students and having to find new solutions and all of that. So we my mantra's just been one day at a time, just get through what I need to get through today and then see what fresh challenges come tomorrow and then address those. So all right. Well, let me keep moving forward here. So, in terms of, I guess the big issue is sort of overall timeline for the next several weeks. I think we scheduled after tonight. I think there are six more class meetings, um, and so I was sort of taking a look at that time frame and figuring out where we are and what weeks things should sort of fall on. So, in general, what um, what I'm looking at is next week, as per the original syllabus, was going to be a week where the groups were just working together on their game projects, and I think I'm basically just going to keep it that way. So, we're not going to try to do an online meeting next week or anything like that. It'll just be a week for groups to figure out what they need to do and where they are and just keep working on the projects. The idea being that in 2 weeks, which would be the 15th, that hopefully we would do some kind of a beta testing of the games. And to be honest, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around what the best way to do that is going to be. When I've done this in the past, obviously, and we're all in person, it's just a matter of this group of people goes over and sits down with that game and tries to play it, and vice versa. So, I want to still somehow have that experience. So, what I may be doing over the next couple weeks is checking in with each of the groups and seeing if the group has a suggestion for what would be the best way to get some feedback on actually having your game played. And maybe it's with what we're having to deal with, maybe it's not even using other people in the class to try the game out, but maybe you've got enough people at home where you could run a trial of your game with spouses and siblings and children and things like that. So but I would love to get some kind of a beta test thing to happen in a couple of weeks. So that would be the 15th. And then sort of setting 2 more weeks past that, which is the 29th, as being the week where the games are actually due and finished and done. And the biggest thing I'm having to think about there is just, again, the practical aspect of these games are going to have physical pieces and parts. And obviously, you won't be able to bring them into class and have me take them with me. So I'm going to have to try to think about what the best way is to deal with that piece of it too. So I'm still trying to work through some of the details, but in terms of a timeline on the game projects, that you would have basically the next 2 weeks to get the games to the point where they can be played. Then the following week, have some way that you can get some feedback by having people actually try the game out. And then the games would be due 2 weeks after that, which takes us up to that's the next to the last week of classes anyway. So that really kind of takes that project out to the end of the course. So, beyond that, within your groups, since again we've lost any ability to be in person in real time or in real life, to work on these games, is just to have some discussions, if you haven't already, within your game groups about how to best move forward. And certainly you can have conferences with each other if you want to use Zoom or something like that, FaceTime, just to be able to talk to each other. But in terms of maybe the workload of getting the game produced, maybe talk a little bit about how to divide that workload up, since you probably won't be able to move materials back and forth. If one person is maybe taking on responsibility for the flow chart or for the instructional video, and someone else is focusing mainly on the hardware parts of the game, and maybe someone else is dealing with the rules and the sort of written parts of the game, or something along those lines. But obviously, we're going to have to get a little creative with just ways to keep these game projects moving forward. Because I do want to finish them. I do want to find some way to get them completed, because you've put a lot of work into them, and I'm really interested to see what you're able to come up with in the end. So I guess in terms of the game projects themselves, any comments or questions or suggestions, or anything along those lines in terms of the project? Yeah, Donnie. Oh, that's okay. I just saw you unmute and didn't know if you had something you wanted to throw in there, but oh, that's all right. Um, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe over the course of this week, a good first step would be to just have a conversation in your groups, because each game is different, and some games need more in the way of physical materials than others, and others are more specific and others are more general. So maybe just start by doing a little brainstorming first, and seeing what you can come up with and what might be possible, and then we can kind of touch base and go from there. And if you've got ideas you want to run by me or chat with me about, feel free to be in touch. But maybe that'd be a good first step, is kind of with this framework in mind now, to spend a little time with your group and think through what that means for your group specifically. And I'm certainly open to making adjustments, and we're all doing that for everything we're doing. So I'm not going to just rigidly adhere to what the original guidelines were. But if there's ways we can work things out, then let's see what we can do initially, and then we can kind of take it from there and see where to go next. All right. Anything else related to games? All right. Well, one thing I wanted to do is just take a little bit of a moment here, because there was a bit of a new thing I wanted to throw out there. And this is, just to be clear, is not any sort of an expectation. I'm not saying that your groups have to make use of this or that you have to make use of this. But particularly now that we've all had to move into this online environment, I did want to take a moment to just point out that there are several, and it's a growing number of resources available online for doing game creation and for distributing games through technology, through the web. And this is certainly by no means an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things that have come across my desk over the last year or so that are related to online gaming platforms that you might want to check out if you're interested, and um, see what they do. I don't know, maybe some of these might offer some suggestions for the game you're creating in your groups. You can use virtual game pieces instead of real game pieces or something like that. But this is more along the lines of just making you aware of a couple of things. So in the class Moodle, I apologize if my voice starts to go a little hoarse. I realize I'm not used to talking a lot these days. I didn't really think about that as a side effect, but it's having to talk the last few days has been interesting. So I did put up a page here with just a few of these links. There are a lot of these sites out there. Each one of these is kind of a slightly different approach. This first one is called Tablero, and it's basically designed to be a platform where you can take any existing board game and convert it into an online format. They call them tables. So you basically create a virtual table, and if you can create graphics in a program like Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever and upload those graphics. You can create cards. I think it's got dice, tools that you can make use of, and it's all completely open source and free. So people just can create games and use them as a sort of an online platform for playing a game. So this happens to be their home page, and they've got a few tables here. It looks like a number of them are not complete, but like here, this one looks like a version of Chutes and Ladders. Oh, I'm not logged in right now. So it lost my login. Anyways, but so this, is just a very simple platform for taking what they were figuring is if you could take an existing board game and kind of recreate the materials digitally, and then people could play the game online as if they were playing it for real. So that's kind of one approach. It's not very sophisticated in terms of gameplay or game rules. It kind of still. Oh, this is Tablero, Tabloro, and there is a link to all of these in our class Moodle. Um, so it's one approach. It's sort of not about, this one is more about the game materials than about the actual game play. So I don't know necessarily that it would know whether somebody is doing something against the rules of the game. It's I think, pretty manual and pretty hands-on, but it is a way to maybe convert a game that's a physical game into an online game if you have something you want to use in a classroom or something like that, something that you've used and it's not available online. This might be something to take a look at and check it out. So that's one sort of approach. I'm actually going to jump to Flow Lab next. Flow Lab, this is kind of somewhere between game creation and teaching kids to program. And there's a lot of things out there like this too. I mean, honestly, Minecraft kind of falls into this category. Um, there's a programming language, and it's just the name of it is escaping me right now. That's a place where kids can build programs online by basically clicking blocks together. That's it, Scratch. Thank you. Um, so this is kind of like that. This is actually a game creation toolkit. So this is actually about creating essentially video games. So it's part, you could create a game to have your students play, but it's also if you want your students to experience building video games. It uses a visual logic builder, so basically you're snapping pieces together to do the programming of the game. Um, and it does have a teacher. It's an educational based thing, so there is a teacher dashboard. So if you have students working on projects, you can take a look at them and so on. It's not free. I think you could try it out for free, but it is a paid app if you want to use it in its full version. But that's kind of there's another whole group of websites out there that sort of fall into this category of building video games, and that's part the experience of building the game, and then obviously also getting to play them. So that's another one. That's Flow Lab. This one, Classcraft, I actually had a student last year. Oh, let me go to the one where I'm logged in, who was using this already in their classroom, and they had kind of gone all in on it. And it's a little hard to describe until you get into it, but it is it's almost like turning your classroom into, like a Dungeons and Dragons world, where your students have avatars that they create. The avatars have all these sorts of uh, um, attributes, and you can set up, the types of quests that they go on. This ties into gamification quite a bit because, for instance, this one that I set up here is designed to do PBIS sorts of things. So you set up quests that involve tasks that the students are supposed to do in a PBIS sort of environment, and they earn their points, their experience points, and all of that from completing those activities, and it gives them that's the reward that they get is building their characters, and they can actually share points with other students. So if they do an extra good task, then they can sometimes give those points to another student who maybe has fallen behind a little bit. So it's kind of taking a lot of those classroom management types of things is what it's geared towards, and turning all that classroom management piece into a game environment. And I did have one student last year who they had already been using this in their class, and they said their kids got really into it in terms of building their characters and tracking how many quests they had completed. And so that's the kind of thing where if you're particularly thinking gamification, this is kind of a classic version of doing that, where you're taking normal everyday activities and turning them into game quests, and having the students earn points and badges and leveling up based on what they've done. So they were either high middle school or high school. So I think they were either 7th or 8th grade or high school. I think they might have been high school. But it was older kids that they were doing it with. Yeah, I mean it definitely requires a bigger level of commitment. And you certainly, if you've got students who maybe just aren't into the whole gaming thing at all, they may not necessarily be turned on by this approach. But at least the student I had last year said that his students kind of went all in on it, and he really did notice that it improved a lot of those classroom management kinds of issues, because it just sort of gave a touch point for what all of that meant, and gave them a visual representation. So yeah, so this is a kind of another approach in terms of taking gaming into the online world. And by the way, all of these are all web based, so they don't require any special hardware or anything like that. They're all accessed through browsers, so they're pretty simple to access. And the last one I wanted to point out is less actually a specific platform, but just this was a resource that compiles a whole bunch of game-based kinds of resources. Some of them are apps, some of them are websites, some of them are free, some of them cost money. But this is one of those clearinghouse resources where it's specifically about game making tools for students. And it's both from the aspect of, creating games for your students to use, but then also giving, a lot of these are things where your students can also be involved in creating games. So there's a ton here, and I clicked on a couple of them that looked interesting. Um, but if you're looking for maybe some other resources, if you're interested in pursuing some virtual gaming or some online gaming, and then they've also got some other resources. Another one here is actually using games in the classroom. It's a video that has to do with incorporating games into the classroom and so on. So that's another type of resource out there. I noticed there's Scratch, so that's gives you a link to that particular aspect. Um, so, anyways, I just like I said, I'm not putting these out there to say, okay, everybody's got to go out there and make use of one of these, or they've got to be a part of your game project. But again, particularly because a lot of us are now having to work in the online environment much more. If you're looking for some additional resources or tools and you want to incorporate some game types of things, that maybe a couple of these resources might be things you want to check out in a little more detail and see if they'd be useful for you. Because all of them don't require physical things; they're all web based. Any, I don't know if there are any questions on any of those or comments or. All right. Well, yeah. Uh, so we're moving actually pretty quickly through tonight. Hopefully, I'm not skipping over anything. So please stop me if I am. The last big thing for tonight that I wanted to talk about was the gamification project. And I know we had just gotten underway with that. A number of you had posted some ideas on the forum for things that you might think about gamifying. And what I'd like to do, I want to keep a piece of this, even if it's more now just a mental exercise than a practical one. So I want to keep the project, but what I'm doing and what I did here on the website is I went in and I took the original overview that I went through and just made some changes to it. And mainly what I did was remove a couple of the steps from the project, mainly the practical application, the implementing, and the evaluation. Because my guess is, particularly if you were thinking about gamifying something in your classroom, now that you don't have direct access to your classroom, that it's going to be a little harder for you to put these gamification projects into practice and to see how they worked. So what I did is basically take those two steps out. So I'd still like for you to go through at least the design phase of it, thinking about a task that you might want to gamify. I did add into the mix classroom, home, or work. So maybe now that you're stuck in your homes, you might have something around the house that you might think about gamifying, in addition to or in place of something that would have been in your classroom or at your workplace. So I did add that in, but I'd still like you to develop a plan for how you might gamify that activity, um, and to work on the A, D, and D pieces of that plan, but then just not plan on implementing it or obviously doing the post implementing evaluation, unless you can and you're interested in. But I'm not going to require that. So if you're doing something in your house and you want to still try it out and see how it works, by all means, feel free to. So the oh, I'm sorry. So just if you want to still implement your gamification idea and it's something you can do at home or from home, I'm not saying that you can't do that. I'm just not requiring it anymore. So if it's something you still would like to try out, if you're trying to get your kids to clean their rooms and you would still be interested in seeing if you can get your kids to clean their rooms, um, then certainly feel free to go through those parts of it. But I'm not going to require that as part of it, since we are now removed probably from the populations we were thinking about trying this out on. So there are basically two pieces to this. One of them we already saw, and that's the forum. Um, and that was actually from a couple of weeks ago. I'll get to it through here. For just to throwing out a couple of ideas and getting some feedback on those ideas. So if you didn't get a chance to post in that forum, I would still say start with that step, um, and just turn it more, like I said, into more of a mental exercise of, if I was to take this activity and gamify it, here's what I would do. And then what I've added into this week's Moodle page is another wiki similar to the one that we're using in our game projects. But this one is for gamification. And this is where you would essentially answer the questions about the instructional design piece of it. So for each of you, I've already created a page. And Christine, I'll go to your page here just because it's right at the top. And on that page is just the framework for questions to think about. And you would basically just be doing the A, the D, and the D piece of it. I left the implementing and evaluating pieces in here. I just scored through them. So if you want to go ahead and do those, or you can, feel free to still fill in the answers to that stuff. But my crossing them out means you don't have to answer these pieces of it, because in all likelihood you probably won't have a chance to actually implement. So the project really just boils down to these, I guess it's 7 questions to go through, just in the interests of, at least from a planning phase, going through how you would gamify something and what sort of things you would think about. So so that's the, as far as we will take those projects. So I'm removing about, what would that be, 2/5 of that project out of the mix to reduce a little bit of our workload and allow us to focus more on getting the game projects finished. So questions on that modification or on the project in general? Uh, that was posted, I think, in week 8. Yes, it was in week 8, forum number 10. But I also, in this week's homework, I put a link to the forum in the homework as well. So you can also click on it right from there. But yeah, it was posted back in week 8. All right, anything else in relation to that? All right, so I guess just to kind of wrap things up for tonight, then, in terms of homework, I just went through the gamification process stuff. So there's a link to the forum. If you haven't yet posted your ideas up there, I would still start there just so you can get some feedback. And if you've already posted yours there, maybe just check in on that forum so that people who have just posted ideas, you can give them some feedback on them. The adjusted guidelines, that there's a link here, but that was the page that I was just on in the Moodle. And then as you can, start maybe filling in your page on the wiki to start filling in the pieces of that. In terms of a due date, I mean, honestly, it would be by the end of this course. but we do have that week in between the beta testing and when the game projects are due. I guess that would be the 22nd. And that might be a good week to try to target having this done, just so that you know it's done and off your plate before we do our final game presentations. But honestly, as long as this is finished by our final week of class, then I'm good with that. So that's it. And then the other piece of it is just continuing to work on the game projects. Like I said, maybe a good first step this week, now that we know what framework we're working inside of, would be to just have a conversation with your group about what you think you can do and if there's any adjustments you think you need to make, and then maybe loop me in on those conversations if you need some input from me about sort of what you plan on doing moving forward. And just try to have the games as a target date beta testable, meaning that the games are playable in some form or another by 2 weeks from now on the 15th. And just keep updating the game wiki. I've been checking in on that, and it looks like all the groups have some information in there, but I have a feeling some of the groups may be still doing some of the tracking in another forum. Just make sure that you're copying that information and getting it filled in on your group's game wiki so that I can take a look at it too. And the idea would be, sticking to what the original syllabus was, is that we're not planning on having a meeting next week. So the next 2 weeks would really be about figuring out the next steps on your games and trying to get them playable in some form by 2 weeks from tonight. So anything else I can go over, or questions I can answer, or assistance I can provide for you at this point? I love random questions. And I still need to get those back to you, and I acknowledge that I am way behind on getting those back. So I yeah, I mean, what I do, for instance, with the Powtoon projects, is basically I create a document that's got the rubric in it, and for each of you individually, and I will fill that page in with the rubric filled in with any additional feedback, and then I will send those to you individually, so that you'll have that kind of feedback, because the Powtoons were submitted through the Powtoon platform. I don't have an easy way of doing feedback at that level there, so I have to kind of do this roundabout method. Um, in terms of the Moodles, again, it's all based off of the master rubric, which I I don't go through the Moodles and score them on that rubric until they're done. Um, but with the informal feedback I've been providing along the way and that you've been getting from other people, if there's something specific you want me to look at in a more detailed way, I can certainly do that. Um, Beyond that, in terms of your grades for this course, really the other piece off of the original syllabus is I guess the closest thing to a participation grade, and that basically is about the forums. And what I do there is I just kind of keep track from week to week on the forums and make sure that everybody's been contributing and so on. So I kind of look at all of that as we get near the end of the course and so on. So as long as you've been participating in the forums as they've been coming up, sorry, I was just talking about the Moodle project, and this isn't the Moodle class. The game projects, the game projects will get a final scoring on the rubrics in terms of that. So yeah, I don't. I guess I don't. I don't do any quote unquote official grades, like a letter grade of any sort, until projects are done. but certainly if there's feedback you need from me as things are in process, feel free to ask for it. Yep. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. So just in terms of final thoughts, hopefully everybody is staying healthy and staying more or less sane. And, we're all working together, and that's been one of the greatest things for me to see. And it's almost become cliche, but it's a good cliche, is to see how our teaching and learning communities have really come together and practically overnight reinvented everything that we do and have managed to keep it going. So, kudos to all of you. And if there's anything I can do to assist, certainly I don't want this course to be the thing that tips you over the edge. So if anything is feeling like too much at any point, just be in touch with me. I'm very flexible when it comes to things like that. And we'll just take it one day or one week at a time. And the plan, I guess, for both classes, because we're not going to be doing a synchronous meeting for the other class next week either, is that the next time I'd be checking in with all of you together would be in 2 weeks. And I'll talk about the sort of the beta testing phase at that point, and we'll take it from there. So, anything else before I sign off for the evening? All right. Sure. All right. Yep. So keep yourselves healthy and sane, and touch base with me as you need. I'll stay on here as long as anybody else is still in the room. So if you have something you want to run by me, feel free to hang out for a little bit. But if not, it's good to see everybody, and stay in touch.